In this video, I wanted to share some of the things I wished I knew before starting a career as a data scientist. I've been working as a data scientist in some of the big tech companies in the US for the last 10 years. And in all these years working on different projects, different companies, working with very smart people, I've of course learned a lot of new lessons. And many of these lessons made me wonder that if I had known that information at the very beginning of my career, I might have made some different choices. So in this video, I wanted to share what are the top things which I've learned in the last decade of my experience. So if you are interested in starting a career as a data scientist, you might be able to benefit from that information. The very first thing I wished I knew when I started a career as a data scientist was having a clarity on what the role of data scientist actually mean. I started my career as a data scientist in 2015. There was not a lot of guidance or courses or even not a lot of jobs for this role back then. And that led to a lot of ambiguity on what the role of data scientist actually mean and what kind of skill set should I be prioritized learning when I'm trying to become a data scientist. And now, a decade later, even though there are a lot of new courses now, but I still feel that there is a lot of ambiguity on people who are starting to become a data scientist on what are the actual skill sets needed to become a data scientist. And there are many other data roles like data analyst, data engineer, machine learning engineer. So how does data scientist fit within the realm of other data roles? So having a clarity on how the role of data scientist differs from these other data roles, what are the skill sets needed to become a good data scientist, and how each of these roles differ in the salary, I think that is a very crucial information for anyone who is planning to become a data scientist, because based on that information, one can make an educated decision on what the career path or the trajectory should look like in the years ahead when you develop your experience as a data scientist. So based on my experience, I have created this chart where I've outlined what the different data roles look like and how they contribute in the pipeline of developing an end-to-end machine learning or data science pipeline. As you can see, there are multiple phases through which any data project has to go through. It starts with looking at the data and fetching the data from data warehouses. So that needs a different kind of skill set. Then there is development of data pipelines, which could fetch the data from these different data warehouses and pull together the information which is actually needed. Third one is that of analyzing that data to get some useful business insights and also building some dashboarding tools so that the business executives can interact with that data on their own and learn something useful out of it. Then the fourth stage is predictive modeling, where you're trying to predict what the future will look like based on the information you have analyzed so far. And probably the last stage is that of model deployment, where you deploy those machine learning models into production and make sure that they are giving good insights on a regular basis, and that there is a whole lot of things which come with that. Though I have tried to sort of figure out where each role starts and where it ends, in reality, these boundaries are very blurry. Most of the data roles are involved from the very start of the spectrum, where we're trying to figure out where the data resides in data warehouse, all the way to deploying machine learning models into production. But here I've highlighted the core area where that data role is most responsible for. So as we can see, the data engineer, it starts from a very good understanding of how the data is stored in different data warehouses and how different data ETL pipelines should be built so that we can extract the useful data for later analysis and model development. Then there is this role of data analyst, which basically works on those data ETL pipelines and then try to analyze that data using SQL and develop some dashboards using Power BI, Tableau, etc. Then the third role is that of data scientist. You can see that this is the widest in terms of what it needs to do. So it is involved in the data ETL pipelines, it is involved in data analysis, it is involved in data modeling, all the way to model deployment. And then there is the role of ML engineer, which from this chart you can see is actually a subset of what data scientist needs to do on a day-to-day basis. So this role is more specialized in model development and deployment. Now let me show you what the median salary in the US looks for these roles. As we can see, data engineer is paid about $130,000 per year. It is usually considered a relatively senior role because you need to have a very good understanding of how different data warehouses work, where data can be resided, what is the best way to develop ETL pipelines. And in some cases, it needs a lot of domain and company data understanding so that you would know that where the data is resided in different data warehouses and what's the most effective way to pull all of that together. The second role, which is most junior friendly, is that of data analyst. There your task is mainly to know enough SQL so that once you know where to pull the data from, you could write the SQL code to develop some ETL pipeline so that you could extract the useful amount of information from there. And then you need to know some basic data analysis and dashboarding skills so that you could analyze that data and develop some dashboards. Since this is limited in scope and most junior friendly role, the average salary for that is $74,000 per year. Next, there is the role of data scientist. As I said, this is the widest in terms of what it impacts. And also there is a lot of confusion, even at companies' end. What do they mean when they're hiring for a data scientist? Some companies, when they mention data scientist, they are basically asking for data analyst role. And some companies, when they're asking for data scientist, they're asking for ML engineer role. And then there are some companies which need both of that, the role of data analyst and machine learning engineer, into a single role, which they call data scientist. So there is a big variation in terms of what companies actually want when they're hiring for a data scientist position. And that is why we see that the salary is also in between these two ranges of ML engineer and data analyst, which stands to be about $121,000 per year. And then we have the most advanced role of ML engineer, which basically mainly specializes in building ML models. You need to have very strong understanding of ML fundamentals, statistics, and then also some knowledge on how you would deploy those models into production in a reliable way. And since it is the most specialized, mainly senior role, the median salary for that in the US is about $146,000 per year. Now, this is the information which I wished someone would have told me when I was starting my career as a data scientist, so that I could clearly envision what the boundaries of the role of data scientist look like and what my career trajectory should be. Now, what I suggest to a lot of newcomers and fresh graduates on how they can become a data scientist is that unless you have already developed a good expertise on statistics and machine learning, probably it's a wise idea to start your career as a data analyst. As you can see, it is a beginner-friendly role and it overlaps a lot with the role of data scientist. Also, if you look at the number of open positions for data scientist and data analyst, there are more job openings for data analyst. Also, the skill set needed to become data analyst is much narrow as compared to data scientist, and be good at some dashboarding tool like Power BI or Tableau. So this is probably the easiest thing to get into. Once you get your first job as a data analyst, then you can use this as a ladder to become a data scientist as probably your second or third job. And then once you have spent about 5 years as a data scientist, then you can transition towards becoming an ML engineer down the line. The second thing which I wished I had some clarity on when I was starting my career as a data scientist was knowing what's the difference between contract roles, full-time roles, and roles which are at FANG-like companies. Because each of these roles have their own pros and cons, and the skill set needed even to qualify as a data scientist in these different roles are very different. For contract roles, the bar to entry is the lowest, and the kind of questions you are asked are mainly around basics, Python, SQL, and knowledge of some tools which that company is using. There are usually just 1 to 2 rounds of interviews, and this is the easiest one to get into. The second tier is getting hired as a full-time data scientist. There the bar of interview is higher because companies are making long-term commitment with you. So they would gauge you not only on the basics of Python and SQL, but they will also try to understand how good your mathematical foundations are and also your foundations for programming. And the third tier is getting a job as a data scientist in some of the big tech companies like FANGs. There they mainly gauge you how strong your fundamentals of programming and mathematics are when they're hiring at these companies. I think this information that these are the different kind of roles which are available and which is most beginner friendly. That information is critical, which I did not have when I was starting my career as a data scientist. If I were to start a career as a data scientist today, I would probably concentrate more on contract roles as well as roles at smaller companies, because there is lesser competition in these two kind of roles and your chances of cracking the interviews as a beginner are much higher. The third thing which I wished I knew was that what is the most optimal learning path on how to learn all these different components, because the field of data science is huge. You need to know SQL and cloud and mathematics and statistics and ML. So there's just a lot of things you need to know. So having a very crisp and clear learning path on what to learn, from where to learn, and how much time should I be allocating on learning each of these components is crucial. And I did not have that information when I was starting my career as a data scientist. And I figured out all that information after spending a lot of years. To help facilitate you, I've created a free roadmap guide on how to become a data scientist. It's a 10+ page document where I've outlined what to learn, from which sources to learn, how much time you should be allocating. It is absolutely free of cost. The link is in the description. Feel free to download it, read it, and hopefully you'll get some value out of it. And I've created another video on the topic of what is some worst advice out there with respect to data science, which is leading to a lot of people wasting a lot of their precious time. The link for that is somewhere here. I'm pretty sure you like my take on these worst advice. Please check it out. Thank you so much for watching.